Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. It was a couple of years ago now that I first met my next guest author at a wonderful literary event in Sydney, back when those things were commonplace. I was struck by this woman's quiet grace and humility as she told me about her debut novel, and I knew then that I had to speak with her on the podcast. That book was The Lost Summers of Driftwood by Vanessa McCausland, a hauntingly beautiful story that has stayed with me ever since. Following that marvellous chat, Vanessa has gone on to write another two novels, The Valley of Lost Stories, and now a brand new novel called The Beautiful Words. Due to be published early next month by HarperCollins, The Beautiful Words is set between Sydney's northern beaches and a remote island off the Tasmanian coast. A book that is as romantic as it is dark, as evocative as it is compelling, exploring friendship and betrayal, love and forgiveness, the stories we tell ourselves and the healing power of words. A brilliant new novel by a born storyteller. So I'm delighted to welcome Vanessa back to the podcast to chat about it. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Claudine. Thank you. That was such a lovely introduction.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I said a little bit about this to you before we started recording, but honestly, this book was just so incredibly beautiful. It took my breath away, Vanessa. Congratulations on its impending release.
Thank you so much. That means so much. I haven't really spoken about the book yet, so it's just lovely to get such, gorgeous feedback. Oh. So thank you.
Now, I can't believe it's been almost a year since I last saw you. In fact, it was at the launch of your second book, The Valley of Lost Stories. So I wanted to ask you, in the lead up to the release of this new novel, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling excited. I'm feeling like I'm just coming out of COVID lockdown. So it's quite weird just sort of coming back into the world and thinking of promoting a new book. It's sort of a little bit surreal almost. But I'm really excited about this book. I actually wrote it during the first COVID lockdown. And so it's almost like I've been in this cocoon writing this book and now I'm sort of coming out of that, which is quite lovely.
Like your last novel, I think it's fair to say that this novel explores female friendship in a big way. And I read an interview that you gave at the time of the release of the last book, in which you said, and I'm paraphrasing, that suburban noir, this genre in which you are writing, explores the drama behind white picket fences and that there is not only beauty in women's connections, but darkness too. Why does that interest you?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I just think friendships, love, life is full of shades, where there's light, there's darkness. I think as a storyteller, I think I must be quite interested in darkness because, as you know, when you're writing stories, it's the darkness or the conflict that propels the story. And so I suppose I find contradiction really interesting as well in people, in characters, where you might see one thing and then discover another. I think I've always found that fascinating. I think I like to explore the stuff that's going on beneath the surface, the hidden, the secrets. I mean, that's what makes a good story, isn't it? That's what makes us keep reading. That's also what we read news stories for, when you see stuff that happens and sometimes you think, that doesn't even seem like it could be real. Yeah. But it is. Like, life is just so full of light and dark.
So was this darkness uppermost in your mind when you set out to write this book?
No. So what happened was we were in COVID lockdown and I said to my husband, I need to start a new book and I just really want to write something beautiful. And I actually used that word. I think I needed to find some beauty, some hope amidst this trauma that was happening in the world. And while, of course, this book does have its darkness and its trauma, I think it's also got really beautiful characters and a really beautiful setting and I think there's a lot of beauty in it, hence why it's called The Beautiful Words. So I actually started from a place of light with this book, interestingly.
For those who haven't had the benefit of reading it as I have, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about the story.
So Sylvie is a logophile. She's a lover of words and stories, but she can't find her own story. She lives a very small and solitary life as a cleaner since an accident as a teenager robbed her of her memories. But when her best friend from that time, Case, invites her to her 40th birthday on a tiny island off the coast of Tasmania, Sylvie finds herself accepting, even though she hasn't seen Case for 23 years, and even though she doesn't really understand the rift that has happened in their friendship, where they never spoke again after this accident. Once in Tasmania, Sylvie really struggles to connect with her old friends. They're all really successful and wealthy, and they all remember Sylvie as this brilliant student and gifted writer, which is something that Sylvie can't really reconcile with herself as she is now. But she also meets Holden, who is the taxi boat driver on the island, and they sort of connect over their love of literature. But he is also hiding from the world as well. So I think it's a story about friendship, about those really soul deep connections that we sometimes have that seem so inevitable and so strong. And particularly that I think happen on the cusp of adulthood sometimes, when friends are kind of everything to young women. And I really wanted to explore the nostalgia of that time. It's also about the treacherous nature of memory and trauma, and also, of course, books and words and how they can be healing.
You talked about wanting to start a story that sort of came from a place of light, but was there a particular event that inspired this story?
No, not exactly. I think I always start more from a character than an event as such. Obviously, there is a really important event in this book that happens at a lighthouse, and that's the opening chapter of this book. And so that was really clear in my mind as well. But I think it started more as the character of Sylvie. Her voice just came really strongly to me, and I just knew that she was a writer and that this was a book about words and books and writing. Yeah, that was the point where I started, and then it sort of just went from there.
We talked a little bit about this earlier, but it's a book that certainly has a number of fascinating threads woven through it. But at the heart of the story is this terrible secret that Case is keeping from Sylvie, isn't there? And I know it's a little bit difficult to talk about this. Spoilers.
Yeah.
But I guess I wanted to go on and say that your portrayal of each of these characters is so realistic, and especially their motivations for behaving in the way that they did. And I can't help but feel a little bit let down by the injustice that was perpetrated here, a cover-up, if you can call it that. Is there anything that you can say about the characters and how they responded to this particular event?
Yeah, I think I wanted to explore the way humans are kind of quite self-serving in many ways, the way that they protect themselves. I wanted to explore the idea of forgiveness and what you can forgive and can't forgive. I also wanted to explore, as I said before, the treacherous nature of memory, in that I think we tell ourselves stories about things that happen, and we almost convince ourselves of our innocence, of our rightness, and sometimes we just have to realise that we're lying to ourselves. I know this all sounds quite ambiguous, but yeah, I guess I just wanted to, bringing in that theme of stories, explore the stories that we do tell ourselves, and sometimes that we remember things in a way that didn't even actually happen. And I really wanted to play with that, especially when you reach a certain time in your life, like middle age, where you look back on your life and the prism of how you look back on it, the way that nostalgia works in making some things really important. And I guess that was sort of, in a way, the feeling of why Case has invited Sylvie to her birthday, that even though all of this stuff has happened, there's this nostalgia for the beauty of that friendship that I think by the age of 40, you can look back and think, wow, that was actually a really special person in my life. That was a special relationship. And those soul deep connections, you don't come across them many times in your life. I know that probably hasn't answered your question, but
as we started saying before we started recording, it's a little bit difficult to talk about, you know, the very heart of this story without actually giving away spoilers. So it is a little bit cryptic, but definitely worth pursuing. Now, something else that you touched on a little bit in your answer there and that you explored in this book was the notion of the mind blocking out trauma. So Sylvie's amnesia surrounding the accident and the thing that happened at the lighthouse was her brain protecting her from the real impact of those events. But her body remembered, didn't it?
I did a lot of research into what happens after a brain trauma. And it's really interesting, and just the impact that it has on the body and on the mind. And it was a real trauma that her brain suffered. But I guess there is that ambiguity there of how much does the mind protect itself without the person even knowing that that's what the mind is doing. You know, like Sylvie lost all her words. She lost the ability to communicate properly. She had to rebuild her life and herself. And for someone that's so word-based and for whom words is everything, that was such a difficult thing for her. But yeah, I really wanted to sort of explore the way that the body and the brain can protect a person. And I guess the book is in some ways her reckoning with her memory and the trauma and finding a way to face it.
The book is called The Beautiful Words, as I've said a number of times, and I think it's fair to say that, as you said, what happened to Sylvie stole her words from her. She was on track to be a brilliant writer in her own right, and the accident changed her so completely, yet words continued to be her solace and the way that she made sense of the world, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. She's a real book lover. She's a real introvert, which I think a lot of book lovers are introverts. I know I am. My daughter is. She's an introvert and book lover. I wanted to look at how books can become or are in many ways like amazing friends as well, and how for a writer, words are the thing that we makes, it's, you know, obviously it's how everyone makes sense of the world, but through writing, that is how we make sense of our emotions. And Sylvie is like that. She carries around this little notebook with a pencil and she has to write things down. Initially, that started after her brain injury where she literally had to write things down to remember, but now it's stayed as a kind of crutch to express her emotions and get an emotion out of her body by writing it. And that's something that I understand in the way that I journal, where sometimes I will write something in my journal and then I'll think, oh, is that how I'm feeling? It's the act of writing that allows me to understand my emotion. So I think I kind of wanted to explore that.
Fascinating, isn't it? And I think you're absolutely right. Many readers and writers are introverts, and I think the act of writing something down, whether it's, you know, it's on the screen or on paper, allows you to explore something you didn't necessarily know that you were feeling.
Exactly. And I think in some ways writing a book is like that. With this book, I didn't know when I started it what it would end up being about and what I wanted to explore. And I think a lot of authors are like that, and they realize only after they've written the book the thing that they subconsciously must have been mulling over at that time in their life. The act of writing makes it so.
Indeed. Now, Sylvie was named after Sylvia Plath, and an important part of Sylvie's story is finding the copy of Sylvia Plath's novel, The Bell Jar, in her room in Case's house. And I'm ashamed to admit that I've never read Sylvia Plath, but The Bell Jar seems to be a metaphor for not only Sylvie's situation, but also for Case, Fran and Eve as well. So tell me, why was it important to you to talk about this book in the novel?
Yeah, it was really interesting. For some reason at the start, I knew that Sylvia Plath and Holden Caulfield were going to be key players because Sylvie's real name is Sylvia, and she was named after Sylvia Plath by her mother, who's an author and loves Sylvia Plath, and Holden, the man she meets on the island, who was named after Holden Caulfield. So I really had a strong sense of those two literary characters, the real author and the literary character of Holden Caulfield, playing a dual role in this book. So I read The Bell Jar, obviously. I had not actually read any Sylvia Plath beyond her poems before writing this. But yeah, The Bell Jar is a really interesting sort of take on her as a young woman and her struggles with mental illness. And that metaphor of the bell jar, of a woman under a jar, sort of stultified in many ways, I think was key to where Sylvie is at in her life, because she hasn't lived her potential and through trauma has been put under this jar. It's funny, I don't think I consciously thought about that, but then in the act of writing it emerged that yes, well, this is why this book is important, why it resonates with Sylvie, why it resonates with Kate.
I learned about another fabulous and fascinating text while reading this book, something called The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows by John Koenig. I'm not sure if that's the way that you say his surname. Now, this was an eye-opening revelation and something that fitted Sylvie's character so well. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, this is interesting because I actually had to take this out of the final copy of the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, I didn't realise when you write a book, you have to get permissions for every single quote that you put in. And it takes a really long time. And this book went to my publisher in March and then, went to print in October. And I got the Sylvia Plath permissions, but I didn't get the permissions for the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. But I love this thing. It's this guy who, I believe he's publishing a book as well as having this website where he comes up with these new words to describe sort of emotions that are so accurate in the way he describes them. And then he'll just have this random word that you've never heard of to describe this emotion. And it's just brilliant. I love it. But yeah, he's not very responsive on his emails. So I had to take that out. But I do imagine that would be the sort of thing that would really excite Sylvie, because it excites me. Like, I was just like, of course that should be the word for a friendship that, broke up for many years and then came back together. That's that word.
Yeah, it's almost as if it was always there. That how could we not have known that?
Yeah. So yeah, it's really worth checking it out. Yeah, the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows.
Yeah, fascinating. Sylvie's job was interesting too. Is there really such a thing as a death curator?
Well, I mean, probably not exactly, but I'm sure that there's definitely people that get hired to do that sort of thing. She's a cleaner, but yeah, more than that, she actually goes into houses after someone's died, not to clean crime scenes or anything like that, because I know there have been books about that before, but to actually just tidy up someone's possessions. Perhaps if the family can't be bothered or the family's not around, just someone that needs to actually get everything out of the house. It's sort of a little bit of an invention, I think, and it's probably a little bit romanticized, but it sort of suits Sylvie really well because she loves stories. And I mean, how many stories would you find in a house where someone has lived their whole life and then, they passed away and they've left all the dead tree of their life there for discovery. And so that sort of inspires her. She feels very protective about these people who she cleans the houses out for. Like, she's kind of somehow preserving their integrity or discovering their stories as though it's a bit of a sacred thing.
I felt it was such a beautiful occupation for her, really.
Yeah, exactly. And other people sort of are quite dismissive of it, and it's obviously got no social cachet or any of that. But for her, it kind of fulfills something, and she feels like she's giving back to the person that has died by just having reverence for their life.
Like your two other novels, this novel had an incredible sense of place. The wild Tasmanian coast was a character as much as any of the human ones. So I wanted to ask you, why Tasmania? What was the attraction and what research did you have to do? And how did you manage with travel restrictions and the like?
I did get there. I got to Tasmania very, very, by the skin of my teeth. I had written about 2/3 of the book, and I'd done that through being in COVID lockdown and basically just fawning over the beautiful images of the Tasmanian coast and wishing that I was there. And there are quite a few amazing Instagram accounts of like Tasmanian shack life, things like that. It's just these beautiful, you know, rugged, windswept little shacks on deserted beaches in Tasmania. And of course, being in a pandemic, I was like, I want to be there. There's no people, there's no COVID there. So that was kind of like a perfect mental escape for me. And also the private island that I've set it, it's just off Bruny Island. It's a smaller island than Bruny, and it's kind of based on a little place called Satellite Island. It's a place you can go. It's a private island that you can actually hire. I've never been there, but one day I would like to. But a friend of mine went there for like, I think a 50th or something. And years ago, she posted images there on this jetty with all these like oyster flats with, you know, a fire going and red wine. And I just thought, oh my gosh, that is my place. Like it just, I think for me, a place that's rugged and windswept and cold is more inspiring than, you know, Queensland. Just, I don't know, I like the atmospheric places. And so I just really wanted to set it somewhere like that. And then, yeah, I got there. I was meant to go with a really good friend, but that didn't work out because of flights and COVID. So I ended up going by myself to visit Bruny Island. And I think in a way it was really apt that I went by myself, because it was almost like I was doing Sylvie's pilgrimage.
Yeah.
She's so solitary, and it was really helpful going there. Bruny Island is just the most gorgeous place, and it is very wild. And I just got a sense of the lay of the land and the type of trees and the way it smelt. And I find that with each book that I write, it's so key to actually go to that place and to feel that place, to be able to channel it fully. That's probably why I'm struggling with my current manuscript, which is set in France.
I don't know that you're going to get to France anytime soon, my friend.
I know. It's very tragic.
Oh, well, I was really inspired by your descriptions of not only the private island, but Bruny as well. Apart from the, you know, inspiration, what is it, do you think, that draws writers to this place?
I think it's probably that it feels like the most pristine and wild place in Australia. Before I went to Bruny, I had been to Tasmania before, 6 Foot Track and Cradle Mountain, and I think that was the first time that I ever saw like a wombat in the wild, all these beautiful deer. It was snowing. It was just so remote and so wild. It's a next level from sort of the mainland, I think. So much beautiful forest. It's just nature at its best to me. I think writers are always looking for an evocative place. So hence the obsession with Tasmania. If you've got evocation in your place, then it's going to rub off on your story.
Yeah, I predict a massive boom in tourism to Tasmania in the next year or two, I suspect. After all of this, you know, everyone's been locked up for so long and people just want to get out and about. And after reading all these wonderful books that have Tasmania as their setting, people are just going to want to go out there and see it all for themselves.
Yeah, and it's like a rural town, but it's a city, you know, like you go to Hobart and there's just this feeling of it not being this big metropolis. It's by the water, it's beautiful, the people are really friendly. You kind of get the best of both worlds.
If there was one thing that you would like readers to take away from this book, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I think when I wrote this, I really wanted to impart my love of reading and writing and books, hence the title. I think, you know, it's about a lot of different things, but really, I think that overall theme of the importance of words and sharing stories, and also how words can set us free, how we can find the truth through words, through writing. As an author, that's what my motivation always is, to find the truth of a character, to tell the truth in the guise of fiction. And so, yeah, I think I'd really love for people to read this book and for it to resonate on that way of, yes, this is why I love books. This is why I love writing and reading. Yeah, I think that's really why I wrote it.
Last time we chatted, you were generous enough to offer tips to aspiring authors. So I wondered if perhaps this time you might give us some insight into your writing routines or habits. For example, do you write every day, or do you work to a daily word limit, or do you work in fits and starts until it's done? Are you more of a plotter or a pantser, that sort of thing?
Yep, no, I'm hopeless. I do not write every day by any means. I never have. I think you do have to make yourself sit down though and do the work. You can't wait for inspiration. I think I always try and sit down and write for a couple of hours every day. And I find that the morning is usually best. I also find that a lot of my ideas come while walking, and also from dreams and from that moment where you're waking up, or when you can't sleep at night and your brain is sort of in this half sleep, half wake time. And that's for me when the plot starts to come. A tip I would give is to sort of listen to your subconscious. Like if you have a dream or you have, like, write all that down. I think it's about trusting your instincts in many ways. But at the same time, comes that discipline that you do just have to sit down and you just have to write it, and you can go back and edit it later. I'm definitely a pantser, but having said that, I find the more books I write, the more I'm sort of wishing that I was a plotter because it's quite stressful when you have a book that, you know, your publisher has bought and you're just writing thinking, I really hope this works out. But at the same time, I think you do have to trust in many ways and just keep going and trust your characters. And if you have characters that you really believe in and whose plight really moves you, I think that is the key. For me, the characters come first and then the plot comes out of the characters. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's the characters and the setting. And if I have that and a bit of an inkling about the plot, I just hope and dream that the plot will somehow reveal itself. So I think for people that don't write every day and feel guilty about it, that they shouldn't, because I never have. And sometimes, you know, when you're editing a current book and then you have to leave the book you're writing and you have a month away from it, sometimes that month is actually really helpful, because then you go back, you read it from the start and you come to it with fresh eyes. In a way, you have to approach it like a business, in that sense that you have to force yourself to just sit down and get the words down. But then at the same time, don't treat it like that either. Like, treat it like, is this a story that I have to write? You know, why am I writing this? If it's not something that you need to write, then don't write it. Like, I think you just have to really feel the import of a book, rather than thinking, what's the trend? What, you know, how should I jump on this bandwagon, whatever. It doesn't work that way. You have to write from the inside out rather than the outside in. That's what I've learned over the years.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. You mentioned that you were working on something else at the moment. Are you able to tantalise us a little bit more?
I wish that I could. I'm trying to write a book set in France, but struggling because I can't go there right now. But then another book, in my sort of hesitancy there, another book has now reared its head. So I'm thinking, do I go with that one and then revisit the other one when I can go to France? I don't know. I've got my ear to the ground at the moment and trying to sort of work on two different things, which is interesting. It hasn't happened like that for me before, but I feel like this journey of writing books always has something different to teach you. And, you know, you'd think by, you know, a couple of books in, you'd just be like, oh yeah, easy done. But no.
I've always been fascinated by this idea that if you're 2 or 3 books in, surely it must get easier, and, you know, surely you've got this, you know, process down pat. But I am assured that is not the case. That in
No.
fact, each book has its own challenges and it's not always easy sailing.
Not at all. And the beautiful words, to be honest, just slipped out so easily, which, it felt like a gift. It just doesn't always happen like that. And so coming off the back of how easily that flowed, it's a challenge, I think, when not all books work like that. But just got to keep the faith.
Indeed. And I have faith in you. I'm sure that whatever that book ultimately ends up being, it'll be beautiful nonetheless.
Oh, thanks, Claudine.
Not at all. Vanessa, I was captivated by this stunning book. Congratulations on another marvellous achievement in the beautiful words. I wish you every success with it. And thank you so much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Thank you so much for having me, Claudine. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.